Welcome to the MaYapinion Podcast, where two dynamic sisters dive deep into the world of women in entrepreneurship, sharing their own personal journeys, insights, and opinions.
From their wins to challenges, the highs and lows of their personal lives, and the hottest topics shaping our world, we are the fierce and fearless hosts that tackle it all.
Get ready for engaging conversations, inspiring stories, and thought-provoking discussions that celebrate the power and resilience of women.
Now, let's dive into an episode where we empower women entrepreneurs, one opinion at a time.
And welcome back to the MaYapinion Podcast. I am excited to be back for our second episode of our relaunch. And today, we are flipping the script. So Lily is going to interview me today, which I'm really excited about. A lot of you guys know my journey already. And when I say you know my journey, I mean, you know my journey in the corporate world. You know my journey in my leadership and basically how I started my career and all the triumphs and challenges and everything I went through in the corporate world. But a lot of you don't know, unless you know me really, really well, a lot of you don't know my experience of turning into an entrepreneur and jumping out of that kind of comfort zone where I was working for a company. I was working for a corporation. And so I think it's really important that Lily interviews me today. And I kind of reintroduce myself to all of you as the entrepreneur that I've been for the past 6 years and how all of that started. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Lily. You excited to be here again?
Yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome.
Okay, well, let's get started with where were you in your career when you decided to branch out on your own?
Great question. Love it. So it's interesting because I started this podcast we're sitting here doing like the third iteration of back in 2017. And in 2017, I was in kind of an interesting place because I think a lot of you guys know I didn't really want a podcast. I was like, I don't know what this is. It's scary. Not really sure. But honestly, this podcast was kind of the beginning of it all, which is really interesting. And I think it's a fun fact to know that this started it all. And a lot of people will ask me this, sidebar for a second, where did the name MaYapinion come up? Where did you come up with that?
Yeah.
And I wish I could claim to fame it. It wasn't me. It was my friends because I'm super opinionated. So I thought, okay, well, I'll call the show MaYapinion. I'll talk about my experience on reality television. I finally said yes to my friend that wanted to produce the show. And we did a couple seasons. And I started to realize, I'm like, okay, I had done live television before. So kind of these things coming together. And that's when I started to do some contract work. Like people were asking me to pick up some contract gigs. That was more in my event world. And I was doing that in addition to my corporate jobs that I was still kind of taking. But getting that first taste of making my own hours, and I was monetizing with the first 3 seasons that we did together, I was like, there might be something to this. But I didn't take that like big leap of faith until later. Like I still kind of kept holding on to that security blanket of the corporate world. But that was kind of the beginning. That was my first taste.
So were you doing both at the same time? Okay.
I was, which I think is important to mention because you can, but I think jumping off the deep end, like really going all in, that's a transition for sure.
Okay. So then my next question, what made you fully transition to being your own boss?
Yeah. The key question, what made you jump off that cliff?
Yes.
Yeah. So in my opinion, as we talk about on the show here, I think this is the hardest part. This is one of the hardest parts. So I kept kind of dabbling back and forth and I kept getting thrown some jobs that were really great. So it's really hard to say no. And finally I said, okay, like I really want to try this. I was doing contract work And in 2019, I got an offer from a small firm to do event sales and do some of the logistics for them and stuff. And I was like, okay, I'll never forget saying to friends and family, I was like, this was like December, November, I took this job. I was like, I don't know why, but I have a feeling this is going to be the last person that I actually like work for, right?
Yeah.
I had this weird feeling. Can't explain it. I said it vocally, so like people hold me accountable to it all the time. And little did I know the reason for that was going to be the pandemic.
Oh.
So the pandemic was a huge reason for this. So I've been working for this company for 4 or 5 months and the pandemic hits. Like we are supposed to be at South by Southwest, which is a huge, if you guys don't know, if you've been living under a rock, it's a huge event.
Yeah.
Huge event. That gets canceled and like things are being canceled. And I should back up for a second because I was at an event with, my employer at the time. I went to Vegas and then I went to San Francisco and fell very ill in February of 2020. Little did I know I had COVID and I had to be quarantined. And that was before we were even talking about COVID. Yeah. It was really scary. And I finally made it back home. And then that's when March hit and the world started to shut down. And so, I was working right alongside the owner of the company and really talking to her through these challenges. And she was like, I don't want to furlough my staff. I don't want to do that. So she partially furloughed everybody. And that was one of the best decisions like she ever made because she was able to retain her staff. But for me, during that time, I started to notice because I'm in the event space as well as podcasting and other things that we're going to get to, I know. Yep. But I started to realize that things were going to be virtual. And I really wanted to embrace that. I wanted to embrace virtual events. I think when you embrace change, that's a huge part of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, a lot of people had to do that during the pandemic. So that's crazy that you took, a niche that people thought was going to be gone because of the pandemic and you made it into your own business.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think I didn't realize I was doing that just yet. I was starting to get people asking me like, hey, do you do virtual things like that? Because I put myself out there because I was partially furloughed like everybody else, or you lost your job. Like there was no, it's like no one was really working full time. We all know this. Yeah. So the culture has changed, right? So I, at that point, had a conversation. It took a little time with the owner and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a risk. And I really did it not only for myself, but for her because I was her right-hand person. I was high up in the company and my payroll really could have helped the other people that were working for her. Yeah. And it was just the best decision for both of us. And I was willing to take the risk and I'm glad I did.
Well, awesome. Okay. Well, now my next question is, can you explain what you do then? Since you said virtual events, so is that the majority of what you do, virtual events?
Yeah. So this is interesting how this all happened. So when I made this leap, I knew I had to do virtual. There was no way I was going to survive, right? So everything that I did had to be virtual. So I was like, okay, like I was doing this podcast, but it was leadership focused, right? Because I was still corporate. So I was talking to you guys about women in leadership. You can always go back and listen to those episodes. But I, was like, okay, what am I going to do? What's going to be my revenue driver immediately so that I can survive, right? And pay my bills and support my family. And I got into virtual events and I just started studying all these different platforms because there were so many, like Zoom had been around, Skype had been around. So they were just like kicking it up even higher. They were like, but then these new platforms started popping up. And this is when virtual reality started to get even crazier. This is when a lot of this stuff was really birthed because
everybody was home.
Everybody was home. Everybody. And this is like, Google Meet, all these different platforms. I mean, hop in. I'm shouting out all my favorite platforms, but Microsoft Teams, I use a lot of Zoom with my clients, but there was this other side where people created these platforms for trade shows, virtual trade shows. They had been out there, but it wasn't as robust as it had been.
Oh, yeah.
So,
of course, yeah.
Right. So they're starting to sell booths. So I had people reaching out to me to do these different things like, hey, can you manage this for me? Can you manage that for me? And it just kind of started to evolve from there. So to answer your question, doing events, that's the majority of my business. I do have some other businesses, but that was the first one that was birthed. And I was like, I'm going to call it MaYapinion. I already have this. I trademarked MaYapinion. So yes, I would highly recommend if you have a name that you really love. So a little quick tip there for everybody.
Yep.
Trademark it. It's worth it. It's taking like 2 years now to get trademarked, 1.5, something like that. So go for it. Best thing I ever did. Besides work for myself. But I think that was the main thing. And I've just gone with it and evolved with it. And I think I enjoy a new challenge. And I think entrepreneurs do. And so that was really important in embracing because it was changing weekly. It was changing so fast. So you really so I had contacts at all these different virtual places and then, also kept my great relationships with in-person places as well, because I knew this wouldn't be forever, but my gut was telling me, I'm like, this is going to be like, buckle up because this is going to be a thing. And we're really just getting back in person in a full capacity in 2023.
Well, did you see a lot of these virtual clients transitioning over to physical clients, having physical events with these clients?
Yeah, great question. So I'll kind of back it up to my first client. So what that helped me take the leap as well. So for me, I was like, okay, I remember thinking this too when the furlough was going on, when I was working for that boutique agency, and loved the gals I was working with. They were awesome. I loved everything they were doing. But again, I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? Like, I know I can build things. I built this podcast. Like, this is technically a business. Like, okay. So I remember starting to talk to some people. Remember back in 2017 and 2018, I did contract work. Keep those relationships. So tip, keep your relationships because you never know where they're going to lead, right? Relationships are just the key. And I remember a couple people coming to me saying, hey, well, do you know this platform or do you know that platform? And this was mostly through LinkedIn or my relationships from the past, us checking in on each other because of the pandemic. And that is a relationship. And one of my strongest relationships, I would still, even working full time for other people, I would still go do contract gigs for her for like her trade shows.
Okay.
She came to me and she said, what are you doing? And I'm like, I told her, I was like, I'm happy. Like, I like it, but I'm concerned. And I really am thinking about going out on my own. And, we had this good relationship and she's a client to this day. So we can talk about that evolution too. But she was like, how about I sign you? Like, and I'm like thinking, So I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, what do you mean? And so like we get on a couple calls, but the final call, now I'm like efficient, right? You grow, you learn. But like this took a couple calls because I was like, how do I do this? Like, how do I retain this person? So we agreed on a retainer. I was learning about doing that because I'd always just charged hourly rates and consulting. So this was a game changer. I was like, okay, I'm building an agency now. And so this was an event agency. I didn't realize that in that moment, but I started thinking, okay, I'm like, I got to open like my own payroll. Like, all those things are like starting to go through my mind. So we signed a contract and that was what I did for her. So I set up her virtual trade shows because you got to think about all these people who were doing events, right? They already had contracts in place. And of course, like hotels or convention centers, they were going to accommodate. I mean, because they couldn't do business either. So they're like, sure, we'll hold it till 21. And I'm like, I remember laughing to myself a little bit because I was like,
holding the events?
The event space, right? So I'm like, no, this is going to be 22, 23. And we were spot on with that. And so I decided with her, I said, great. So I helped her pick the platform. I helped her set up. I helped her with sponsorship. I helped her with tickets. And I'm like, this is exactly what I've done. But so that's what really gave me that final shove to go out on my own. I was like, okay. I have one client on retainer. I'm good to go.
And so you were still working in corporate America during this time too?
That's what made me leave.
Okay.
So that was the transition. So when I signed her in, what was it, April, May, I left the boutique firm, like I was mentioning earlier, because it was the best choice for everybody. I know it was a bummer for them because I was bringing in sales, but it was difficult because I felt like they could keep their staff afloat and keep them going. And I felt like that was more important. And I just felt like I wanted to be my own boss. I really didn't want to build somebody else's business anymore. Not that there was anything wrong with their business. It was great. And they really were one of the best boutique firms I had ever worked with. But I was like, I can do this. You know, I feel like that's a moment that you have, right? When you're like, wait, I can do this. And I got a client. And for me too, with getting that client, it was like, okay, what do I need to make to be able to pay my bills to build my business?
Yeah, because you have to think about that. It's not just going to happen overnight. So you got to really.
Yeah. And these are conversations I was able to candidly kind of have with this particular client because we had known each other for a couple of years at this point. And, you know, we kind of met with what in the middle with what was fair and what was fair on both teams. And then I was off to the races, and that's what I did. And then I started picking up more gigs, more virtual.
What did the next 6 months after that look like? Did you immediately have other clients, or was it hard to go out and find them, or was it word of mouth? What was happening?
Great question again. Oh my gosh. So this can be the tough part. This can be the really tough part because you get a slam dunk and then you go, oh, okay, well, how do I do the next one? Yeah. So you kind of have to remember, okay, not every single client, some of them are a long game, you know, like you start the conversation, and some of them are a short game, like they're ready to hire you and ready to go. And that was a lesson I learned very fast because we had, you know, this client and I, you know, she's fabulous to this day and is still a client. We had this relationship for years already, right? So that I realized that was more of a long game client, even though it seemed fast because she was like, yes, let's make this happen. We had a relationship. So what I did is I tapped back into a lot of my relationships and let people know like, hey, I'm doing this now. I don't really like the term expert because I don't think you're ever an expert at anything. You can always get better. But I'm like, I would tell them like, hey, this is what I specialize in. Like these are these platforms, right? And so it took time. It's like, it kind of reminds me of starting this podcast because I was like, whoa, it happened so fast, but it's because I did a show, right? So I had a lot of publicity. But with this client, that really did give me the confidence to go out and I learned so much. Yeah. So within the first 6 months, I would pick up gigs. Like I would pick up like an event, like a Zoom event or this or that.
And how would you hear about them?
Yeah. It was relationships. Again, I know I keep saying that if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. It literally, I can't even tell you. And another tip is when you're building your business, you're not going to come with a book of business unless you are able to bring that from somewhere. But typically you have NDAs. You can't bring clients from other places, right? You may have to start fresh in some ways, right? So for me, I learned very quickly that on LinkedIn, you can go and see people will post stuff. They'll post their needs.
Okay.
I also, you know, I put myself on platforms that I don't utilize as much anymore, but I still like, don't knock it. I still get fabulous clients from these platforms. So like Gig Salad is a fabulous one. Believe it or not, Thumbtack guys, like they have opened up. So again, they had to shift with the pandemic. So you could put all these different service orientated like jobs. So that's how I started picking stuff up. But it was like ad hoc, right? It was like here or there. So I started investing more in real estate and things like that too to supplement. I flipped a house during, 2020 when this was going on. So I was really hustling.
A lot of things.
I was hustling. Yeah, I was hustling. So that's what the first 6 months really looks like. It's building your book of business. That's what it looked like for me. And I think it looks like that for a lot of people. But definitely celebrate those wins. If you have people on retainer or whatever it is to pay your bills, like then you can kind of relieve the stress. But building up to those next retainer clients, that took me another year. It took a full year, probably. less than a year. By the end of 2020, I then had 3 clients like that on retainer. And I had multiple clients where like I would do, because I do a lot of nonprofit, right? And I do corporate. I don't do weddings. I don't do things like that anymore. It's not my vibe. I'm more into the nonprofit. I like a cause. I like to feel, but by the end of 2020, it was actually a great year for me because then I brought on another retainer client, and then by the end of the year I had another one. So going into 21, I was really set up for success. And then I had those one-off events that are fundraisers, galas, things like that for nonprofits. And you asked me earlier about referrals. That's when the referrals started to come in.
Gotcha.
So it took a little, I'd say 9 months. It was like birthing a baby. Without the physical. It was like 9 months. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing though still. All right. So that was several years ago. What has it looked like since then? Your build up.
Yeah. I mean, we're sitting here in the summer of 2023, right? Summer of 23. It was a journey. So I was so pumped because now I'm like, okay, I've got multiple clients on retainer now. And I guess I should explain, like, for people that are like, what is that? I think a lot of you know what retainer means, but they pay you a certain amount a month. It's guaranteed. You work a certain amount of hours based on your hourly rate. And that was exciting. I was like excited. And I also had these, strategic events planned through the year. And I was like, okay, so I could start to really look and understand what my business was going to bring in financially. For the business and what I needed to put out, because then I was like, oh crap, I need like a website. I need intake. I needed a virtual assistant. I needed somebody to help me because now I have my work email that needs to be monitored. And I was personally handling all of that. And I had my podcast. So I'm like, quickly things were starting to build up. And I'm like, okay, so a little bit like we talked about on your interview, the outsourcing thing was kind of that became a thing for me. And that was really hard for me because this was my baby. I was like trying to build this. Oh, like I even have to deep breathe just thinking about it because I didn't want to let go of the reins.
Yeah.
But I needed to. So that was kind of my first steps in outsourcing, was somebody helping me with email scheduling, really basic stuff.
Do they just monitor your email? Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's something like if that's a time thief for you and you own more than one business, or if you're starting to really grow, I highly recommend. Like that's the first, like your business is a little bit different, but it's similar. Yeah. It's similar though, because you're outsourcing and it's kind of like having an assistant. That was huge. And being a virtual assistant blew up during the pandemic. Say,
great business right there, virtual assistant.
Hot tip. If you want to work from home, if you're a great virtual assistant, it's a game changer for someone, especially when they're growing their business or they're completely overwhelmed and you're like, hey, I'll work 10 hours a week for you and do this and this and this, get a couple clients. That's your full-time gig. Hot tip. But and then, for those of you out there listening to this and watching this, that really changed everything for me as well, because I'm like, okay, now these menial,
grab more clients,
these menial tasks that I was doing, like it changed everything. I shouldn't have to respond, but you do in the beginning, but I didn't feel like I needed to respond to every little email or every little comments. Like I needed to be responding to my clients. I needed to be responding to the right guests for my show. So it helps you prioritize. So that's kind of what 21 looked like for me. It was juggling more than one client, like on retainer.
And how do you do that? You're figuring that out.
Yeah, you're totally figuring it out, because some clients they're all different. They're snowflakes. I use that analogy in a lot of things that I talk about, but they're snowflakes. There's no two client alike. Like it's like people. And so you're learning them, and that's a whole other thing you got to do, which I enjoy, and it's exciting for me, but it's not for everybody. But that was something I had to figure out. I was like, am I going to enjoy learning these different personalities? And sometimes you decide it's not a fit, and like,
well, they're also not from all the same company, so you're dealing with different types of companies each time.
Great point. So that's the other thing. You have to, like, and I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs understand this, especially in my industry, but there's a lot of industries. So I think a lot of you guys can connect with, there's a lot of industries out there that deal with different, you know, I like working nonprofit. That's a passion for me, but I'm not working with one nonprofit that's like feeding, you know, this is one I work with, but feeding girls all over the world. I'm not working with like 7 of those. I'm working with...
You have the one. And then...
yeah. And so like the next nonprofit is helping, you know, I'm making this stuff up because, you know, it's NDAs for my clients. Other hot tip, do not talk about your clients. But, you know, helping the pandas, right? I mean, another one could be doing a fundraiser for, you know, a particular community, you know, it just depends. And that's something you have to figure out. Do you enjoy that? I'm extremely ADHD, if you guys haven't realized that. I'm more ADD than the H, but that's toned down a little bit. So I enjoy it. I love flipping, but it takes a certain personality. There's some people that really just want to be like, nope, I specialize in this, and this is who I work with. And that's cool. That's totally cool. But you kind of figure that out. And that was really, so like 2020 was like the year where I was like, figuring it out. 21 was my building year. It was really building, and building off of the clients that I had. And like, we go back to referrals, like that kind of kept snowballing for me. And so then going into 22, that's when we started to go back in person for events. 21 a little bit, but there were so many restrictions. A lot of clients did not want to deal with it, so they stayed virtual. Yeah. I still have clients to this day that are only virtual still. And there's reasons for that. They can drive more revenue. Cheap. Yeah. You already know. Yes. So it's cheaper, drive more revenue.
More people probably can attend.
Exactly. More people can attend. Little to no overhead except for the platform you're using. It just... You know, and it depends. And that's a part of, I started to get woven into that process with my clients as well as I became more of, again, I don't like to say expert, but a specialist, I would say, I guess would be better for this. A specialist in that area and understanding like, hey, who's your target? Who are you trying to target? Because hybrid became a hot thing, right? When we were going back in person, because some people, this was 21 and 22, hybrid, a lot of hybrid events.
Oh, half. Virtual, half. Okay.
You're so smart. Yes. So yes, for those of you who don't know, it's both. So it's like you're able to attend virtually, depending on whatever platform we're utilizing, or you can come in person. And what people don't realize is that is not 2 events that you're throwing. It's like 3. Because it's so intensive and it's also expensive because the equipment that you have to capture things, and you have to have a lot of back end people to make it interactive. So I always tell people, I'm like, if you're attending, all of us have attended a hybrid event. All of us have attended in person. All of us have attended an online. So have a lot of appreciation if you're attending a hybrid event, because there is so much work behind the scenes on those. Because
do you like doing those or no?
Absolutely not, no. I'll just be honest. No, I do not. No, I don't. But, and here's why. I'll tell you why. It's not, you know, I'm not scared of hard work. So no, it's not that. I don't like it because I find that one of the experiences gets lost. So you're either focused, you know what I'm saying? So you're either focused a little bit too much on the virtual aspect. So your team there is really worried about capturing things and making sure that they feel involved, because on the flip side, the in-person can be a much better experience because you're just focused there and you forgot, oh, wait, I've got 100 people, 1,000 people, whatever size, because I do all different sizes of events. Oh, they're online too, right? So if I'm in the audience or if I'm interacting, or depending on what type of event it is, these people can be running around with cameras and you're like, that's so distracting. So that's why it's like 3 events, because you're managing 3 aspects. So Are those my favorite? No. I'm happy we're back in person to answer your question. But that's what it's looked like. And, we're in 23 now and we're growing. And I never thought I would have like an exclusive AV team working with me. And I do. I have contractors that work under me. And I'm excited to see where it continues to go. So if you want me to plan your event, let me know. But I still have all virtual. I still have in person. I have a few hybrid that I still do, but that people are pretty much kind of parting the seas and going one way or the other, which I agree. In my opinion, that's the way to go. Pick. Yeah, and stick with it.
Well, tell us, I know you mentioned you flipped a house, you sold a house, so what, it sounds like you have multiple businesses. What are businesses? Businesses. So what do those look like?
Yeah, so a lot of people thought I was nuts when people probably still think I'm a little crazy for some of the stuff I do. But people thought I was crazy because I took the leap during the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
Initially, right? Now they're like, that's so cool you did that. I'm like, yeah, it was not an easy decision. It was very scary. It's scary to take the leap in general. But a pandemic? Like in a worldwide pandemic, and you're going to go do this? Well, I felt like now or never. Well, during that time, I started to have more ideas come up. So the first thing that I started doing was exactly what you mentioned. I had done it before, like I had bought and sold before and I made a profit, but I didn't realize that like, okay, I can take that profit and not just go buy a personal property. I can disperse this profit. And so that's exactly what I started doing in I didn't have enough going on in 2020, right? So I was like, let's just add this to the plate. But I had lived in this condo longer than I had lived anywhere. And so, my husband and I, we moved out and we moved to a bigger house with, all the dogs we have. They needed more space. I mean, you're on top of each other in the city. So it was time. So we were going to rent it and then we decided to flip it. And so I managed the whole project and I'm like, when did I do that? I don't know. I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I realized flipping really wasn't for me during that process.
Okay.
But the profit made because everyone's in their house. Right. That was
you on it.
That was for me. So I thought, how do I do this? I'm not because I used to watch those like flipping shows.
Yeah.
Do you still watch those? I don't really watch those.
I don't watch those anymore. I used to watch them a lot.
And I used to think,
oh, that's so easy.
Yeah. Did you think that too?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's so easy. It's not. And even if it's your own house and like, oh my God, it's not. And we weren't even living in that condo, right? So I was battling back and forth and I was like, do I rent it? I'm like, let me sell it and then let me see. And then after that, that's when we made a great profit. We had already bought the other house. So we all know, if you save money, you lose money. And you might look at me like I'm crazy. Hot tip. No, in my opinion, though, if you save money, you're losing it. You need to invest it in something else. And I knew that. And that's what got me doing my side hustle of investing in properties and renting them. So it was a crazy market during that time, though. So I got some tips about like, look for off market. And I was like, what does off market mean? It means someone who's wanting to sell their house off market. And you just have to kind of have your eyes open, right?
To research and
a little bit, but Facebook was my friend because I would see people talking about it. Like, hey, I might list this or something. Started to get into some of these real estate groups, and it's probably the quietest groups for me. Like they talk a lot, but for me, I'm like a fly on the wall. And when I see an opportunity. So that started that part. And I operate that under MaYapinion as well. So,
okay, awesome.
But I am not crazy enough. I learned very fast to manage the properties. Like I buy them, I invest in them, and I have a manager for that. Outsource.
And
then it kept evolving. And so in 21 is when I got the idea for Find a Co-Host, which is the sponsor for this season for the show. And I came up with this idea because MaYapinion, I had a co-host.
I was gonna say, you needed to find
I needed to find a co-host. And there was nowhere to go when I was relaunching in 2019 because my original co-host who produced it and everything for me, he moved to California. And that was before the pandemic. So there wasn't, I'm going to shout out, there wasn't Zencaster, happens to be my favorite. But there wasn't, Zoom didn't have the same capabilities, didn't have the same connection that most people use, or all these other platforms too. They just weren't out there. And so I thought, okay, and that's why I decided to relaunch the show on my own and bring guests on. And now I've got you, which I'm so excited. But I thought, like, if I'm having this problem,
other people are. Yeah. Who wants to do, say it's an interpersonal podcast, who wants to do that by themselves, or has anybody that is interested that they know that has the time?
Well, I started to realize a lot of things because I had this idea and the name didn't come to me right away. It was not like MaYapinion. I just knew I wanted that to be my brand. I knew it. People had called me it for years. They're like, okay, in her opinion, MaYapinion. Like, so that kind of just was fun and evolved and I love it. And I'm really, really happy with it. It's just fun. And it's a great conversational thing too, because people are like, I love that name. That's so fun. It's warm, right? And that's why I decided to operate the podcast, the events, and the house, all that stuff under that. Find a co-host was different. The name didn't come to me right away. The idea, I was like, okay, there's got to be something here. And so I would just poll people because I was in the podcast community, So I was like, hey guys, is this an issue? And then I started getting in more podcast groups like Facebook, Reddit, place, all these places you can go. And so then I finally just Googled on top of that too. I was like, because when you Google how to find a co-host. And what came up? Nada. Nothing. Zero. Zip.
There you go. That's how you do it, though.
Absolutely. Well, because that's something I know we'll talk about in future episodes, but you got to make sure the idea is not already out there, guys, before you invest a lot of your time.
Even if you had found an idea out there like that, you could still have revamped it, or, some people, they put things out there and then never do anything with it. So you still not a dead end if you do find somebody doing the same thing as you. You just need to do it better.
Okay, that is an amazing point. Yes, you just need to do it better because there's how many hosting platforms for podcasting now, right? There's how many event platforms that we just talked about for a while. So if it was out there, I was like, how am I going to do it better? And it actually was. So I had to dig pretty deep to find that out, but it was out there because Anchor tried it before Spotify bought them. And so I started doing my research, doing my Maya late nights where I stay up till 3, 4 in the morning. And people are like, oh my God, what are you doing awake still? That's this kind of stuff I do. I go down these rabbit holes, which we all do, right?
I was going to say everybody does. Yeah.
We all do it. But that was the kind of stuff I would rabbit hole. And I found that. And I'm like, okay, what didn't work? What didn't work with them? And basically what they did is they threw on their, the Anchor app before Spotify bought them. Just like basically you could sign up, I could sign up, and we could.
It would match us.
There was no matching algorithm. That's what I found out. That was the key. That was the boom moment where I was like, wait, there's no, because it's all about the algorithm. We could do like a song, all about the algorithm. You know what I mean? Like it's true though. And so she thinks I'm hilarious. Anyway, so I was like, okay, there's no algorithm. So basically, if you went on there, there was a button you could press. I'm simplifying this, but this is basically how it was. And you could say, oh, who's on the app right now? And let's see if we match. What are the odds that you're going to be on at the same time and want to talk about the same thing?
On at the same time? Okay.
So it's kind of like a live Tinder-y kind of situation, right? You could test it for a minute or something like that. Your audio together. Great idea. But there needed to be algorithm behind it, right? An algorithm, an actual understanding of because I want to talk about women who play volleyball and you want to talk about how to thrift. I mean, I'm just making this up, right? We're not a fit. So I'm going to waste a minute of my time? No. So I'm like, I got it. Okay. I know what I got to do. This has to be like a Tinder-y kind of situation or like a matching situation, but even more elevated because as you know, because you're doing this with me now, you got to vibe with each other. You got to have a connection. And I realized it was a problem because some people were like, oh my God, my best friend and I, this would be a great fit. Lots of problems happened with that, right? Like one would be more committed than the other, or like just you both have to be into it and really committed. So one night I'm laying up and I'm like, I bought all these different URLs. Yes, this is the life of an entrepreneur, and this is coming up with like a fresh idea. And I was just like, okay, co-hosting, co-casting. Like I was buying all these different ones because they're not that expensive to buy, but they're expensive if you keep them for a long time. And then it hit me. I was like, you're find a co-host. I'm like, duh. And so, of course, I like get up in the middle of the night and I go buy the URL. And it was a much, much more expensive URL to buy. So I was like, okay, I've got something here. Like it was not, $12. It was a lot more. So I'm like, okay. And then I got my web developer, which I had started out, outsourcing to him. So I'd already been working with him since 2020, early 21, so we had a relationship for a little while already. Because it took me until close to the end of 21 to launch the site. And we really didn't start matching until 22. But I did my research and all of that stuff. And now we matched in 22. We actually took the first 100 people for free because we wanted the data. So that was a lot of work.
Yeah.
It was a lot of work. We wanted the data, we wanted the information, and we wanted success stories. And then once we got them, we started charging. And it's still pretty affordable. So if you need a co-host, I mean, it's not going to be that way forever.
Yeah.
And now I have a CTO, I brought her on to do the back end stuff because we were matching everyone manually.
Oh my gosh.
So that was crazy.
Yeah.
So that's when we were like, okay, paywall's going up. We're charging now because it worked, And then, I said, okay, I was like, and I met with a couple different people and I happened to end up developing this relationship with a girl. She's a friend of mine. And that's what she does. She's a fractional CTO, which means that you come on board for short periods of time. And instead of just coming onto a company for like indefinitely, right? Until you're ready to go to your next job. So I said, will you come be a part of this with me and help make an algorithm happen? So when every person comes through, I don't have to go through all my data. And she did that. So that's where we're at now, and successfully matching. And we are moving forward with some more development. So it won't just be a website one day. It's going to continue on. So this has been a labor of love for sure.
Yes.
But it was I think that's where a lot of the good ideas come from, is that you have a personal problem, you solve it. So did I cover all my business? Oh, and I have another podcast as well. So I do this podcast, and then I also do a podcast about the death of our brother and supporting siblings like us who have lost a sibling in all different ways. It's called the Surviving Siblings Podcast. And I now speak at conferences about that too. So it's been an evolution for sure. So
awesome. Well, we've heard where you've been, where you started. So what's next? Where do you see everything going in the future?
As I look up dreaming, where do I see everything going? Definitely want to continue growing my event business. I am loving the clients that I've been working with and I'm moving forward with. Nothing's perfect, right? Like some of them are your dream clients. As you start down the path, you start to get those dream clients. And that's kind of the sweet spot. Like I feel like it takes a couple years and we're there and we're working with some incredible people. I see that continuing to grow. And I'm continuing to outsource stuff, and that's
as you grow, you're going to have to outsource more.
It's a personal goal for me. So I see that happening. So that's really where I see that business continuing and evolving. We're on the podcast together. So we're going to continue to empower women with our opinions. One opinion at a time, our opinions first, and then we'll have more incredible women on in the future. So I definitely see that continuing, and I can't wait to grow this with you. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too.
Yeah. And
well, do you see yourself buying more houses, and is that something you want to keep with too?
Yep. So summertime is a horrible time to buy. It's so hot. It's like, and I don't mean just the temperature. I'm saying the market, and the market's super hot. So yeah, I'm always like on the lookout for the off market. I'm definitely going to continue to grow my rental portfolio because I have a great, shout out to him, great manager, right? That manages the properties. Not something I would ever care to do. So I definitely see myself doing that too. Find a co-host. I can't talk about too much of the future because we're doing so much of the behind the scenes work.
Yeah.
But we're on a really, really good path. And I would I think everyone can kind of guess we're on track to make it an app one day, but that takes a lot of time. That one's a long game because it's functioning the way that it needs to function right now. And we have success. So I'd love to see that go in that direction too. And yeah, I think we covered. Oh yeah. And of course the podcasts are going to continue and surviving siblings. If that's something that, if you know a sibling, that has lost a sibling, we're going into season 4 that'll come out September 13th. So we're rocking and rolling. Yeah.
Well, this has been super informational. Thank you. So can we tell everyone where we can find you?
Absolutely. So of course, we want you guys to follow us on our social media, right? For the podcast at MaYapinion Podcast. It'll be in the show notes. We're on Instagram for at MaYapinion Podcast. But if you want to follow me, super easy. Everything's at Maya Roffler. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. And we'll have a private group as well that you guys can join as amazing followers. Awesome. And also follow us on YouTube. If you're watching this, you already found us. So make sure you follow, subscribe, and follow. But it's at MaYapinion Podcast as well on YouTube.
Awesome. And what if we want to work with you?
Thank you for asking that. So I'm very active on social media, so you can always message me. But the best way to get straight to my email and rock and roll, you can email me, maya@mayaroffler.com, or just go straight to my website, mayaroffler.com. And it has all of this information, all the business stuff that I do is mayaroffler.com.
Awesome.
Yeah. You'll find me.
Easy.
That's what branding is all about, right? Making sure people can find you. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening. Hope you learned something. Hope you had fun. Hope you learned some opinions that Maya had.
I have a lot of opinions. Thank you for interviewing me. This was super fun.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the MaYapinion Podcast. Make sure to follow us on all major social media platforms at MaYapinion Podcast. And don't forget to follow Lily at Upcycled by Lils on Poshmark, TikTok, and Instagram. And don't forget to follow Maya at Maya Roffler on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. We'll see you back here next time.